In 2005, 8-year-old Emily Parker vanished from her elementary school in suburban Ohio just minutes before the final bell rang. She was never seen again. No one had seen her leave, and no trace of her was ever found. 8 years later, while cleaning out old boxes in her attic, Emily's mother, Laura, discovered something chilling: a crumpled drawing stuffed deep inside an old-school folder. The picture, unmistakably drawn by Emily's hand, depicted a little girl and her teacher, a tall, shadowy man with a long white beard, standing too close. A long-buried secret was finally clawing its way to the surface. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you love mystery and true crime stories like this. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The sun had just begun to peek through the clouds that morning in the quiet town of Fairbridge, Ohio, a sleepy suburb where people still left their doors unlocked and children rode bikes until dinner. Laura Parker stirred her coffee at the kitchen counter, glancing at the wall clock. It was 7:42 a.m. From upstairs came the soft thud of tiny feet, and moments later, her daughter Emily appeared at the bottom of the staircase, teeth freshly brushed, face clean, and her favorite yellow sweater proudly worn over a collared shirt. Laura smiled. "You remembered picture day?" Emily nodded, adjusting the bunny on her sweater so its little ears sat just right. "I want to look nice," she said shyly, slinging her purple backpack over one shoulder. "You look perfect, Em," Laura replied, kneeling to smooth down her daughter's pigtails. "Come on, let's get you some toast before the bus comes." They sat together at the kitchen table. Laura spread butter while Emily stared quietly at the fridge, her eyes locked on a drawing from last week. Two stick figures holding hands beneath a rainbow. One was Emily. The other was labeled Mom. "You okay, sweetheart?" Laura asked, noting how unusually quiet she was. Emily blinked and nodded, as if pulling herself out of a fog. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "I don't know, stuff." It wasn't unusual for her to get a little dreamy, Laura thought. Emily had always been thoughtful, a sensitive soul who loved to read, loved art, and was often in her own world. Still, something in her tone felt off. But the moment passed. At 8:05 a.m., the bus pulled up, brakes squealing gently in front of the house. Emily grabbed her lunchbox, gave her mom a quick kiss on the cheek, and ran out the door. "See you after school," she called over her shoulder. It was the last time Laura Parker would ever see her daughter. Fairbridge Elementary was less than 10 minutes from their home, a modest brick building with a rusted flagpole and a mural of smiling children painted near the front entrance. It was safe, familiar, the kind of school where the biggest crisis was a broken water fountain or the occasional food fight. That's why, when the final bell rang at 2:45 p.m. and Emily Parker didn't come outside with the rest of the second graders, no one panicked. Not at first. Laura pulled into the pickup loop right on time. She recognized the flow of backpacks, parents leaning out car windows, kids yelling goodbyes. But as the stream of students thinned, her daughter was nowhere to be found. 5 minutes passed, then 10. She parked her car, got out, and approached a teacher supervising the crosswalk. "Excuse me, have you seen Emily Parker?" The teacher looked puzzled. "She was here today, right?" "Yes, I dropped her off this morning." More staff were called over. The front office was notified. A voice came over the intercom asking if Emily Parker was still in any classroom. No response. Within an hour, every hallway, restroom, classroom, and closet was being checked. The police arrived shortly after 4 p.m. By then, panic had replaced confusion. Security footage showed Emily arriving that morning, walking in with her class. But the cameras near the back exit, one pointing toward the rear of the building, were grainy and partially obscured by a tree branch. No one remembered seeing her leave. There was no sign of struggle, no screams, no reports of a strange man, just silence, like she had evaporated. Her backpack was later found in the cubby area outside her classroom, undisturbed, zipped, lunch uneaten. By sundown, helicopters hovered overhead, search dogs sniffed the wooded area near the school, and volunteers scoured sidewalks and fields. Neighbors left porch lights on and stayed up, checking behind sheds and garages, even under porches. The town changed that day. In the days that followed, Emily's face appeared on flyers stapled to telephone poles, printed on grocery store doors, and flashing across local news broadcasts. Laura appeared in front of the cameras, voice shaking, pleading through tears. "If anyone has seen my daughter, please come forward. Emily is kind, she's quiet. She wouldn't just run away. Please help bring her home." The police followed every lead. There were tips about a suspicious white van, reports of a man seen near the school fence, and even a psychic who claimed Emily was near water. None of it led anywhere. The town held candlelight vigils. Her classmates drew pictures and wrote cards to her, left at a growing memorial in front of the school. A small pink bicycle was leaned against the flagpole, surrounded by stuffed animals and flowers. But as weeks passed, the search quieted. Fewer reporters came, tips slowed, and one by one, people began to accept what Laura never could, that Emily was gone. A year later, the second-grade class moved on. The cubbies were used by new students. Mr. Granger, the teacher for Room 2B, retired quietly at the end of that school year. His name faded from conversations, even as Emily's disappearance remained the town's deepest wound. Laura kept her daughter's room exactly the way it had been. Bed made, stuffed giraffe perched at the edge of the pillow, books neatly arranged. The yellow sweater Emily wore that day hung in the closet. The lunch she never ate was found moldy in a plastic container. Time passed, but nothing filled the hole. Every night, Laura would lie awake wondering, did someone take her? Was she scared? Was she still alive somewhere, waiting for her mother? She couldn't stop reliving the moment. Her daughter turning at the edge of the driveway, calling out, "See you after school!" But the final bell rang that day, and Emily Parker never walked out of her classroom again. It had been 8 years. 8 long, aching years since the day Laura Parker lost her daughter. She still lived in the same house in Fairbridge, though the town had changed around her. The coffee shop where Emily used to beg for hot chocolate was now a chain bank. Her elementary school had been renamed, but the ache, that stayed. Laura rarely went up to the attic. There wasn't a reason to. It was mostly storage, boxes from her marriage, old clothes, photo albums, toys she couldn't bear to donate. The air up there always smelled faintly of dust and insulation, like time itself had gone stale. It was a gray afternoon in March when she finally decided to go up. A neighbor was moving and offered to take old furniture off her hands. She remembered a folding table in the attic and figured she'd take a quick look. The wooden stairs groaned as she climbed. At the top, Laura flicked on the bulb, bathing the cramped space in a weak yellow light. Cobwebs clung to boxes. Dust swirled in the air. She crouched near a stack of plastic bins. Her hand hovered over the box. It was one she hadn't touched in years. She opened it slowly. Inside were manila folders from each grade, kindergarten, first, second, filled with school projects, spelling tests, drawings. There was a paper titled, "My Favorite Place is the Zoo," complete with crayon lions. Another showed a shaky handwriting practice sheet with the word "Mom" written over and over again in purple pencil. Laura smiled sadly, fingers tracing the pages. Then, near the bottom of the stack, she noticed something odd. A crumpled piece of paper tucked into the corner of the box, wedged beneath the last folder. It wasn't one she remembered placing there. She picked it up gently. The paper was stiff, like it had been folded and hidden for years. When she smoothed it out, her breath caught in her throat. It was a drawing, childlike, crude, but unmistakably Emily's style. 2 figures stood in the center. One was clearly a little girl. Big eyes, pigtails, a yellow shirt drawn with care. The other was a tall man with a long white beard, towering beside her. They were holding hands. The man's other hand was touching her back. The background was the classroom, recognizable by the familiar chalkboard and the rows of stick figure students with blank faces. but there was something deeply wrong about the way the girl's face was drawn. Her eyes were wide, her mouth a straight, anxious line, and in the corner, written in small, uneven letters, were the words, "He said not to tell." Laura felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at the drawing, unable to move. Her hands began to tremble. This wasn't just some old-school project. This was a message, a secret kept in crayon. And it wasn't there before. She was certain. She'd gone through this box countless times over the years. This drawing had never been in it, unless someone had put it there recently. Her breath caught. Her thoughts raced. She stumbled down the attic stairs, drawing clutched in one hand, and reached for her phone. When she arrived at the police station an hour later, Detective Alicia Moreno was already waiting. Moreno had only been a rookie when Emily's case broke back in 2005, but she remembered it vividly. Now, nearly a decade later, she'd risen through the ranks, and when Laura walked in holding that piece of paper, Moreno dropped everything. She studied the drawing silently, eyes scanning the lines, the expressions, the words. "You're sure this wasn't in the box before?" she asked gently. "Positive," Laura said. "I packed that box myself the week after Emily went missing. I looked through it dozens of times over the years. This drawing was never in there." Moreno nodded. "It looks old, but not degraded. No water damage, no tearing." "Do you recognize the man?" Laura hesitated. She didn't want to say the name, but the image had triggered something. A memory. A voice. A white beard and a gruff tone. "Yes," she whispered. "That's Mr. Granger, her second-grade teacher." Moreno blinked. "The same teacher from the year she disappeared?" Laura nodded. He retired right after. I always thought he was strict but harmless." Moreno sat back, processing. "We'll need to re-examine his file. There were no allegations against him at the time, but things get buried. People don't always come forward." Laura clenched the edge of her coat. "What does this mean?" Moreno looked back at the drawing. "It means your daughter might have been trying to tell someone something before she vanished, and someone made sure she never got the chance." That night, Laura sat at her kitchen table, the drawing spread out in front of her like a crime scene. She tried to imagine Emily at that age, 8 years old, sweet, careful, with hands barely able to grip a thick crayon. She imagined her daughter alone in her room, drawing this, hiding it, afraid. She wondered if Emily had told anyone, a friend, a teacher, and more chillingly, she wondered, did someone find out that she was going to tell? She didn't sleep that night. She just sat in the dim light of the kitchen, staring at the image, replaying every memory from that year, every drop-off, every parent-teacher conference, every small hesitation Emily might have shown. For 8 years, the house had been quiet, still, like time had stopped the day Emily vanished. Now something had shifted. Something hidden was finally crawling into the light. The next morning, Laura was already awake when her phone rang. She hadn't slept, just laid there in bed, eyes wide in the dark, clutching her daughter's old teddy bear like it could rewind time. The caller ID read, "Detective Alicia Moreno." Laura picked up instantly. "We ran the drawing through our forensic imaging team," Moreno said, skipping pleasantries. "It's consistent with paper stock the school used back then. The crayon is aged but preserved. It was likely sealed somewhere dry, like an attic." "So, it's real," Laura said flatly. Moreno's voice softened. "Yes, and we're treating it as new evidence." Laura's chest tightened. "We reopened the case this morning, and we need your help." They met at the Fairbridge Police Department. Laura walked past the front desk and into the records room, the same one she had visited 8 years ago when she was begging for updates, answers, anything. But this time was different. Detective Moreno had laid out Emily's file on a long table. Photos, timelines, teacher interviews, missing flyers yellowed with age. Laura sat down across from her and stared at the largest photo. Emily grinning at the camera, front teeth missing, in a pink shirt that read, "I'm 8 today." It was the last photo ever taken of her. Moreno gestured to a file with a paperclip. "This is Mr. Granger's personnel file. We pulled it from the school district. No formal complaints. Stellar reviews. Taught second grade for over 30 years. Retired abruptly in spring 2006, just a few months after Emily's disappearance." "Where is he now?" Laura asked. Moreno hesitated. "He passed away in 2011. Heart attack. Lived alone. No surviving family." Laura stared at her hands. "So, if he did something to her, we'll never be able to ask him." Moreno didn't respond right away. "That's true. But there may be other ways to find out. Colleagues, students, something he left behind." Laura exhaled slowly. "He was always quiet, reserved, never raised his voice. But Emily never really talked about him, just called him Mr. G." "Did she ever mention being uncomfortable?" "No," Laura said. "But she did start withdrawing. Around February that year, she used to love reading aloud. Then she got shy, and she started waking up with nightmares." Moreno leaned forward. "That lines up with the drawing. Something happened in that window." Laura nodded, the weight of memory pressing down. They started with old classmates. Moreno arranged for interviews with several of Emily's second-grade friends, now teenagers, high school seniors. Most remembered vague fragments of the year, snack time, recess, spelling tests. But one girl, Jessica Lively, now 17, remembered something else. "I used to sit behind Emily," she said, sitting stiffly in the station's interview room. "She was really quiet those last few weeks. I asked her once if she was okay, and she said—" Jessica paused, fidgeting with her sleeve. "She said she was scared of someone, that she was going to tell her mom." Moreno's eyes narrowed. "Did she say who?" Jessica shook her head. She looked around like she didn't want to be overheard. Then she said, "I shouldn't say it out loud. He'll know." Laura sat frozen in the corner of the room. Her heart felt like it had stopped. Jessica looked at her with sad eyes. "I thought she meant another kid, or maybe a bully. I didn't think it was a teacher." "Did you ever tell anyone?" Moreno asked. "No," Jessica whispered. "I forgot about it. Until now." Back at home, Laura walked into Emily's room for the first time in months. Everything was frozen in time. The bookshelf filled with picture books, the stuffed animals arranged neatly on the bed, a framed drawing of a cat in the corner. She sat on the bed and pulled open the desk drawer. Inside were pencils, stickers, a few rocks Emily had collected, and a stack of folded papers. Laura rifled through them without much thought, until she saw it. Another drawing. Her hand stopped. This one showed the same classroom, the chalkboard, the windows, the stick figure desks. But this time, there was no teacher. Just Emily sitting alone, a word bubble over her head with the words, "I don't want to stay late again." Laura stared at the page, her throat dry. Why hadn't she found this before? She looked through the drawer again, heart pounding. No lock, no hidden compartment. But something in her gut twisted. Emily had been trying to speak, through crayons, through silence, and no one had listened. Moreno returned later that evening with a new lead. "I tracked down one of Granger's former co-workers," she said. "A woman named Mrs. Kirkland. She retired the same year. She says something's been bothering her for years." They visited the nursing home where Kirkland now lived. She was frail but sharp-eyed, her voice brittle but lucid. "I never had proof," she told them, "but I always thought there was something off about Granger. He kept his door closed during recess, and he always volunteered to walk the girls to the restroom, even when they didn't ask." Laura felt bile rise in her throat. "Did anyone report it?" Kirkland gave a tired smile. "Back then? We didn't talk about things like that. You needed hard proof. And he was a respected teacher. 30 years of service." Who was going to believe me? She looked at Laura with a quiet, painful sadness. But when Emily disappeared, I knew in my bones it had something to do with him. That night, Laura sat at the kitchen table again, but this time she wasn't alone in her grief. She had something she hadn't had in years: momentum, a path, the start of an answer. Emily had tried to speak, through whispered warnings, through crayon drawings, through one brave sentence to a friend. "I'm going to tell my mom." But someone made sure she never could, and Laura knew now she was going to finish what her daughter had started, no matter how long it took. The following week, Laura returned to the halls of Fairbridge Elementary for the first time since 2005. The building looked almost exactly the same. Blue-painted lockers, the smell of disinfectant and pencil shavings, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, but something inside her clenched with every step. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves remembered. Detective Moreno walked beside her in silence as they approached the old second-grade wing. "This classroom," she said, gesturing at room 12. "This is where Emily was last seen." Laura stood in the doorway. The lights were off and dust danced through a narrow stream of sunlight. The teacher inside now was someone younger, a woman in her 30s, who had agreed to let them look around after hours. The room was smaller than Laura remembered. Tiny chairs, low cubbies, the same green chalkboard at the front, still scarred by years of eraser scrapes. "She was sitting right there," Laura whispered, pointing to a seat by the window. "By the bookshelves." Moreno nodded, opening her notebook. "There's something else." She reached into her bag and handed Laura a faded copy of the original police report from 2005. It detailed the timeline. Emily was marked present that day. Multiple staff recalled seeing her at recess. A lunch aide remembered her in line for pizza. And then, nothing. No one remembered seeing her leave. No buses reported anything unusual. No witnesses. Just a child vanishing between the final bell and the end of pickup. Moreno tapped a line in the report. Mr. Granger told investigators that Emily had stayed behind to finish a drawing she wanted to show her mom. Laura blinked. "He said she was gone by the time he turned around," Moreno continued. "Said he assumed she had left with a friend." Laura clenched her jaw. She never came home. They stood there in silence. Then Moreno added, "I checked records from that year. He was the only teacher who didn't have a teaching assistant in the room during dismissal. Of course he was." Later that afternoon, Laura and Moreno met with Cassandra Hill, one of Emily's former classmates who still lived in Fairbridge. Now 16, Cassandra was tall and quiet, with soft brown eyes and a nervous smile. She agreed to speak with them privately at her home. "I remember a lot from second grade," she began, fingers twisting in her lap. "Emily was one of the nice ones, always shared her snacks." "Do you remember anything from the day she disappeared?" Moreno asked. Cassandra nodded slowly. "We were cleaning up after art. Emily had made a card for her mom, a drawing." Laura's eyes widened. "A card?" she asked. "Did you see it?" "Just a little. It had hearts on it, and a picture of a man. Big beard. I thought it was her dad." Laura's breath caught. She said she didn't like how close he stood to her desk sometimes, that he smelled like cough drops. Moreno gently leaned forward. "Did she say who it was?" "No, but—" Cassandra glanced at Laura. "We all knew Mr. Granger was weird." "Weird how?" "He'd always touch our shoulders, say he was proud of us, but he'd leave his hand there too long, and he never did it to the boys, just the girls." Moreno nodded. "Did anyone report it?" Cassandra looked away. "We were kids. We didn't think anyone would believe us." Laura's chest felt hollow. All these tiny warnings, all those unspoken whispers behind closed classroom doors, and none of them had reached her in time. That night, Laura dug out Emily's old journals. Most were half filled with doodles and misspelled sentences about butterflies and cookies. But one notebook stood out. It had a sticker of a gold star on the front. Inside, in neat second-grade print, Emily had written, "Things I don't like at school." The first few pages were innocent. "Math is hard. Sometimes I trip when I run. Kayla makes fun of my braids." But halfway through the notebook, a line was scratched in darker crayon. "I don't like when Mr. G watches me during art." Laura's breath hitched. Another page. "He put his hand on my back too long." I moved away, but he still smiled. Another. "He said not to tell or I might get in trouble." Tears streamed down her face as she read. This was it. Emily had been speaking. She just hadn't known how loud her silence truly was. The next morning, Moreno called with more news. "I spoke to one of Granger's old neighbors," she said. "He remembers seeing Granger outside the night Emily vanished, pacing in his backyard around sunset. Said he looked nervous." "Did anyone tell the police?" "They did. It's in the original file." But it wasn't considered significant. There was no direct evidence tying him to anything, and no one thought to push harder. Laura closed her eyes. It was a pattern. Dismissed feelings, brushed off warnings, a slow, quiet cover-up sealed by time and adult indifference. They returned to the school one last time, this time with permission to search the old classroom storage unit. It was dusty, filled with outdated textbooks, broken globes, and crates of unused supplies. At the back, they found a locked metal filing cabinet. The janitor offered them the key. Inside were years of lesson plans, old student projects, and at the very bottom, a large manila envelope labeled "To be shredded." Moreno opened it. Inside were dozens of drawings, childlike, colorful. Laura sifted through them. Then she froze. There, in faded crayon, was Emily's handwriting. "I don't want to stay after class anymore." Another showed 2 stick figures, one large with a beard, one small with a sad face, and a caption underneath. He said, "Don't tell." Laura stared at the page, her hands shaking. "Why would he keep these?" Moreno murmured. "Why not destroy them?" Laura answered without thinking. Because deep down, he knew what he was, and part of him wanted to be caught. By now, the case file on Mr. Richard Granger was thick with disturbing implications, and for the first time in 8 years, the name Emily Parker was again being spoken in the town of Fairbridge, only this time with a note of shame. Detective Moreno requested a full background review of Granger's 34-year tenure at the school. Personnel files, evaluations, parent complaints, anything that might explain how a man with no prior criminal record could still be tied to the unthinkable. The files came back with a familiar pattern. He had charm when he needed it, Moreno explained to Laura over coffee at a quiet diner on the edge of town. A clean reputation on paper, but scratched beneath the surface. She slid over a copy of a faded memo, dated 1997. A parent had complained that Granger made her daughter uncomfortable, always calling her sweet girl and touching her hair. The file noted that Granger had been spoken to, but no formal action taken. Another note from 2001 mentioned that he frequently volunteered to supervise detention, particularly for female students, despite it not being part of his duties. Laura leaned back in her seat, her arms folded tight across her chest. All these signs, and no one stopped him. Moreno nodded. They didn't see it for what it was, or didn't want to. But the most disturbing document was a handwritten disciplinary form from 2003, 2 years before Emily vanished. A 12-year-old girl had written that Mr. Granger had asked her to stay after class to help clean up. During that time, he allegedly placed his hand on her thigh and whispered that she was very mature for her age. The girl's mother pulled her from the school the following week. The incident was quietly documented. No charges were filed. It was never followed up. Laura couldn't stop shaking as she read the pages. Her mind flashed to Emily's drawings, the way she had stared into nothing some days, picking at her lunch, the way she sometimes flinched when someone touched her shoulder. She hadn't seen it then, but she saw it now. Later that day, Moreno and Laura drove out to Mr. Granger's old house. He had passed away in 2011, just 2 years before the rediscovery of Emily's drawing. The home now sat abandoned, the lawn overgrown, the shutters crooked like broken eyelids. "He lived alone," Moreno said, unlocking the front gate. "No spouse, no kids. Retired in 2006 and disappeared into his own world." The house smelled of mildew and time. Inside, stacks of old newspapers and books lined the walls. Faded student artwork still clung to the refrigerator. It was eerie, like the school had followed him home. Laura wandered through the hall, peeking into rooms. One door at the end was locked. Moreno pried it open with a crowbar they'd brought from the trunk. Inside was a small, windowless den, and on the far wall, dozens of laminated thank you cards from former students. Laura stepped closer, but there, tucked awkwardly between 2 bright cards, was something out of place. A photograph, faded, blurry, clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. It was Emily, sitting on a bench at recess, a juice box in her hand, smiling faintly. The angle suggested it was taken from a distance, possibly behind a classroom window. Laura felt her legs go weak. This wasn't just a teacher being inappropriate. This was obsession. The next few days became a blur of interviews and quiet confrontations. News of the reopened case had spread, and with it, former students and parents began stepping forward. One by one. A woman in her 30s said she remembered Granger telling her when she was 9 that she had grown into her figure quickly. A retired custodian recalled once catching Granger in the storage closet with a crying girl. When asked, Granger claimed she'd twisted her ankle. The girl never returned to school. They'd all held on to these memories, unsure if they meant something, unsure if they'd be believed. Now they knew. And then came the break Laura didn't expect. It was Moreno who found it, buried in a box of evidence from 2005 that had never been digitized, a small voice recording. Back then, the school had encouraged students to journal aloud as a creative exercise. They'd recorded these audio snippets as part of a literacy program. One of the tapes had Emily's name on it. Laura sat in the precinct's media room, hands trembling as she listened to her daughter's voice again after 8 years. "Hi, this is Emily Parker. Today I saw a butterfly. I gave my cookie to Kayla, and Mr. G told me to stay after class again." Silence. Then quieter. "I don't want to stay again." Laura covered her mouth. Emily's little voice cracked. "He touched my hair and my back. I told him to stop. He said, 'Don't tell, or I'll get a red card.'" A red card? Laura remembered. That was what the school gave out for bad behavior. Emily hated getting them. The recording ended with the click of a tape deck. For Moreno, it was enough. The district attorney agreed. If Granger had still been alive, charges would have been filed immediately. But he wasn't. He had taken the truth to his grave. Still, for Laura, the truth had finally crawled its way into the light. Her daughter had not wandered off. She had not been kidnapped by a stranger. She had been groomed, silenced, and made to disappear by a man everyone thought they could trust. A man whose classroom door had closed one too many times. Laura stood outside the school on the 8th anniversary of Emily's disappearance. She placed a single white flower beneath the window of room 12. It was quiet now, the walls freshly painted, a new teacher inside. But she knew, deep down, that part of her daughter would always remain in that space, in the laughter she left behind and in the silence that followed. And though justice had come too late, truth had finally arrived. 2 weeks after the rediscovery of Emily's audio recording, Laura received a call she wasn't expecting, from a woman named Tasha Green. Tasha had been a 6th grader in 2005. Now 24, she lived a few towns over and had seen news of the case's reopening online. She hadn't said anything back then. She'd been too afraid, too unsure of what she saw. But now she was ready. Laura met her at a small cafe in Dayton. The tension in her chest wound tight as piano wire. Tasha arrived clutching a small plastic folder. Her hands shook slightly as she placed it on the table. "I think I should have spoken up sooner," she said, "but I didn't know if what I saw even meant anything." Inside the folder was a yellowed sheet of drawing paper, torn at the edges. A child's drawing. Simple, messy lines done in crayon, but unmistakable. 2 stick figures, one with long brown hair, Emily, the other tall with a big white beard, and next to the white-bearded figure, a speech bubble. It read, "Don't tell her." Laura stared. I don't understand," she whispered. "Where did this come from?" Tasha's eyes glistened. "Emily gave it to me a few days before she disappeared. We weren't even that close, but she looked scared. She handed it to me and said, 'If something happens, show this to someone.' Then she ran off. Why didn't you?" "I thought it was just pretend, like she was being dramatic. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble if it was nothing. And after she disappeared, I was terrified. My mom told me not to say anything, that it'd only bring trouble." Laura stared at the drawing. She remembered Emily using those thick crayons. She remembered her daughter practicing speech bubbles in cartoons. This wasn't pretend. This was a cry for help, and it had sat in a folder untouched for nearly a decade. Detective Moreno took the drawing into evidence the same day. Coupled with the audio recording and witness statements, it helped fill in the most important blank. Emily had told someone. She hadn't kept it to herself. She'd tried to tell, in the only ways a frightened 8-year-old could. More importantly, it proved that Mr. Granger had threatened her, a man in authority. A man whose classroom was a fortress with no windows and no oversight. A man who had silenced one little girl and almost every adult around her. The new drawing triggered the reopening of student files from that 2004 to 2005 class. Laura was allowed to return briefly to Emily's old desk, now stored in a long-forgotten supply room at the school. Some former teachers said students often stash notes or drawings inside the metal cavity beneath the writing surface. With permission, Laura opened it. At first it was empty, save for a broken pencil and a paperclip. But taped to the underside, almost invisible, was a folded paper, aged and delicate, drawn with thick green and blue crayon lines. Another drawing. This one was simpler. Emily and her mother standing outside their house, a sun in the corner, trees, smiling faces. But in the corner, drawn faintly in gray, a third figure, Mr. Granger again, with a red X over his head. On the back, scribbled in uneven pencil, were 4 words. "He's bad. Don't trust." Laura clutched the drawing to her chest. She could hardly breathe. Her daughter had fought, not just to survive, but to be heard. And though her voice had been lost in the noise of adults who didn't want to believe, now, finally, it was echoing, loud, clear, unignorable. Later that evening, Laura sat at home with the 2 drawings spread before her. On the table sat Emily's school photo, that same soft smile, the bright, hopeful eyes, and beside it, a fresh folder. Inside, a printed summary from the DA's office, concluding the case. Though Mr. Granger was deceased, the official language was stark. Based on overwhelming circumstantial evidence, credible witness testimony, and physical artifacts provided by the victim's surviving family and associates, it is the finding of this office that Richard Granger is the likely perpetrator in the abduction and presumed death of Emily Parker. No other suspects meet the criteria for continued investigation. It was not a perfect ending. There would be no trial, no confession, no moment in court. But it was an answer, one that Laura and Emily had waited 8 long years to hear. That weekend, Laura organized a small memorial at the school. Just a few close family members, friends, and several former classmates of Emily's who were now in their late teens and early 20s. She brought with her the drawings and placed them under a glass case in the newly named Emily Parker Reading Nook in the school's refurbished library. Above the case, a plaque read, "In memory of Emily, a bright light whose voice is finally heard." As she stood there, Laura felt something she hadn't felt in almost a decade. Not closure, not peace, not yet, but validation. Her daughter had tried. She had drawn, spoken, trusted. And now, the world believed her. The spring air felt different that year, gentler somehow, still sharp at times, but less heavy than Laura remembered it ever being. It had been just over 3 months since the case had officially closed, since Emily had been named, at last, not just a girl who vanished, but a victim of a crime that people finally believed had happened. And still, Laura found herself waking at night expecting to hear footsteps in the hall, a child's laugh from the next room. Old instincts embedded like roots too deep to pull out. But slowly, the house had begun to breathe again. She'd taken down the yellow ribbons, not because she gave up, but because the meaning had changed. They were no longer a symbol of waiting. They had become something else, a marker of a past she had finally faced. Now, in their place on the front porch, she'd planted marigolds, Emily's favorite. Bright orange petals stretching toward the sky, their color as loud and fearless as her little girl once had been. That morning, Laura sat at the edge of the bed, a letter in her lap. It was from the school district, a formal apology printed on thick stock paper. It acknowledged what had long been unspoken, that protocols had failed, that signs were missed, that a child had spoken, and the adults around her hadn't listened. The last paragraph read, "We recognize that no words can restore what was lost, but we offer this, a commitment to never again allow silence to stand in the way of safety." Laura folded the letter and placed it inside a photo album, not because she needed their apology, but because maybe one day someone else would. The school held a second ceremony that month, this one public. Dozens of former students, faculty, and community members gathered in the courtyard that Saturday morning. A new stone had been placed beneath the oak tree that once shaded the playground. Etched into its surface were 7 words. She tried to tell us. We know now. Laura had chosen them herself. She didn't want hollow poetry. She wanted the truth. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't use notes. She just stood there, looking out at faces that had once filled the halls where Emily had walked, laughed, trusted. "My daughter was 8 years old," she began, her voice low and steady. She was kind, creative, loved to draw. She made up little songs and sang them in the car, and she hated mashed potatoes. Laughter, soft and warm, moved through the crowd. She trusted the world, Laura said, and the world didn't protect her. But she tried to protect herself. She tried to tell someone, and for too long, we didn't see it. She held up a laminated copy of Emily's final drawing, the one with the words, "Don't tell her." "I'm showing it to you now because I want you to remember that children do speak, sometimes not with words, sometimes with drawings, with glances, with fear." Her eyes moved over the crowd, landing on the front row, on Tasha Green, on Emily's old classmate Olivia, on Detective Moreno, all of them changed by what had been uncovered. "Listen to your children," Laura said. "Believe them. Ask questions. Don't let your silence be the reason someone else's child disappears." She stepped down to applause, but it wasn't for her. It was for Emily, for her courage, for her drawings, for the 8-year-old girl who had tried to scream through crayons. That night, Laura finally entered Emily's old room, the one she had kept closed for so many years. She didn't turn on the light, just opened the door, let the moonlight spill in. The air smelled like dust and old books, her daughter's books, her toys, her tiny shoes still lined up near the closet. And on the shelf, framed and set in the middle, a photo of Emily holding a sketch pad, grinning wide, front teeth missing. Laura walked in and sat on the edge of the bed. She pulled the final drawing from her bag, the one she had found in the attic, and placed it on the desk under the light of the window. Not as evidence, not anymore, but as a voice, preserved, a truth that had waited too long in silence. Some mysteries end with arrests, others with trials. but not all of them do. Some end with a quiet knowing, a picture, a sentence, a mother choosing to believe what others were too afraid to see. Emily's case had never been about proof in the traditional sense. There would be no handcuffs, no courtroom gasps. Mr. Granger had died in his sleep in 2011, peacefully, alone, and never questioned. But now, his name would be remembered differently, not as a trusted teacher, but as a man who used that trust to manipulate, to silence, to hurt. And Emily would not be just the girl who disappeared. She would be a warning, a message, a little girl who refused to stay quiet. Today, a mural stands in the hallway outside her old classroom. Painted by local artists and former students, it shows a field of marigolds stretching toward the sky. And in the center, drawn in soft brushstrokes, is a little girl with a sketch pad in her lap, crayons in hand. Beside her are words Laura chose herself. Some voices are soft. Listen harder. Emily Parker vanished in 2005, but it took 8 long years, a forgotten drawing, and a mother's relentless love to finally bring her truth to light. We often think of justice as something delivered in courtrooms, but sometimes justice is found in the smallest things. A crumpled piece of paper, a whispered memory, a child's quiet bravery. What other voices have we ignored? And what would happen if we started listening?